thing is the hustle never ends. It never
It
ends.
never ends.
Right.
That's why I'm so not into the phrase break in, because I think sometimes people think like once you break in, right? It's like glass, you break in, the glass no longer exists. You're in the space, it's over. But like it's not that. You have to carve, is how I say. You have to carve in, like there's constantly more material in front of you that you have to sort of, make your way through.
You're listening to Screenwriters Need to Hear This with Michael Jamin.
Hey everyone, it's Michael Jamin. Welcome back to Screenwriters Need to Hear This. I don't even know the name of the podcast. I screwed it up. Screenwriters Need to Hear This. I'm going to roll with it. And I got a great guest today. This is Chandra Thomas, and she was a writer for 2 seasons on Mom before the show got canceled. It's not her fault though. Don't blame her. And then I met her last year on Tacoma FD, and she's amazingly talented. She's wonderful, and she was also an actress. And everyone should watch this, because you look at, oh yeah, she's beautiful. She's an actress. You could see why she'd be an actress. But she's going to talk about her journey. Chandra, thank you so much for joining me on the show.
Jamin on the ones. Thank you for having me.
Chandra, you don't know this, but because last year we were on Zoom, so all the writers were on Zoom. But if we were in person, I would have probably made you sit next to me every I'd be like, hey, Chandra, what's going on over that guy? Or that, we would be passing notes to each other.
I love that. It would have been like high school all over again. It would have been great.
Alas, it couldn't do it.
So one thing I just do want to clarify, I was on the final season of Mom. So just 1 season, unfortunately, on that show that I absolutely love.
2 seasons. So you definitely, so it was definitely your fault then when the show.
So not my fault. I would have had that show run for another 300 seasons.
You want to keep that gravy train rolling. But I want to talk about, I got so many questions for you.
Okay.
And I know some of the answers, but most of them I don't know. Because I know you graduated Vanderbilt College. Was there always your ambition to be a writer or actor, even in college?
So when I started at Vanderbilt University in Nashville, Tennessee, I was like not sure what I wanted to do, but probably law, because I am a first gen. My parents are immigrants. And like, if there's anything an immigrant parent's going to tell you is you got to do law, medicine, own a business, or being an engineer. And I did not like the idea of like somebody could die on my watch. So I was like, not a doctor, like definitely not that. Engineer, physics was a little rough for me. So I was like, no, thank you. And maybe I would own a business at some point, but it sort of ended up being law was where I was sort of drawn to.
What did you major in?
So then in my first semester at Vanderbilt, I was into theater, just like I had done theater in high school and in middle school, and my parents had taken me to see a ton of plays. I'm from New York, so we, go to Broadway and see plays. And I just had this like sort of like Thanksgiving revelatory moment where I was like, oh no, I want to like be in theater. I want to just be on stage and write stage and make plays happen. And so I came home and had to tell my immigrant parents that like I was going to do this theater thing, which they were like, what? What does that even mean? That's not why we came to this country, at first. Now they're like literally the co-chairs of my fan club. They are incredible. So then I decided to double major in theater and sociology. So I got 2 bachelor degrees from Vanderbilt. And then when it was time to graduate, everybody was like, cool, let's go get jobs and do stuff like that. And I was like, I know how to go to school. I'm going to keep doing that. So I went to Columbia University in New York and got my MFA in acting. And so started working as an actor pretty immediately and very consistently. But at the same time was always writing, was always producing, especially in theater. Transitioned pretty quickly to sketch and improv, was at the UCB a ton, and then transitioned into indie film, indie short form content, digital shorts, and just really was like about storytelling. Most people sort of immediately sort of knew me in front of the camera, but I was sort of always working on the other side as well. And so it's been a long.
Were you writing?
Say again?
Were you writing for yourself when you were acting, or were you just doing other people's work?
At first I was writing for myself. And then I think, as like most theater practitioners do, I was like, I need to start writing for other people too.
Yeah.
So I wrote a whole bunch of solo shows. I have a like
I
ton of
know.
solo shows that I was doing all over
And
the
where were you
place.
staging these?
Different places, sometimes in somebody's living room, sometimes in a theater, a lot of New York off-Broadway, off-Broadway spaces.
But so were they one man show or like a one woman show, or is it, or
Yeah, solo, I did several solo shows. Yeah, I have one that's called A Rhyme for the Underground, which is I play 17 and a quarter characters, and it's set in the subway, the New York City subway system. So yeah, I was doing solo shows. Yeah.
No, it's interesting. But then, okay, so that when you're even theater, were you booking? Because people miss this part. Like, were you booking the theaters yourselves, or were you pitching it to theaters? Like, how did you put them up?
A mix of things. Like, so once I got sort of plugged into the sort of indie theater producer circle, we were putting up each other's work. I was putting up the work. I was submitting it to theater companies that were putting it up in some capacity.
Who's putting up the money for
in a lot of different ways.
Who's putting up the money?
You figure it out.
They're not
You figure it out. I mean,
and who's putting
sometimes for some of the
who's putting all the butts in seats? Who's selling? Who's getting people to show up?
That becomes the artist's job. That's the big thing, right? So in some theaters, we'd be able to do like proceeds from the ticket sales, right? Sort of split the box office is essentially sort of like the way people sort of shorthand it. And so that would be one way. In terms of getting butts in the seats, though, that would always fall on the artist. So, this is before sort of social media was as like readily hot as it is now to like sort of share those kinds of things. So it became postcards and flyers and putting up posters in storefronts and emailing friends and texting people to come. And so, yeah, it was like a lot of literally guerrilla marketing in the most purest form.
How many seats are you talking about in these theaters? How big are they?
So most of these theaters are 99 and under, which is part of the actors.
Right, equity waiver.
Mm-hmm. Well, different. In LA, they call them waivers. In New York, they're just theaters. Okay. So you can work under an equity contract. I know in LA, you sort of like waive like working under the union. That's not how we do things in New York. So it would be a special showcase contract is what it's called. And so you'd be able to sort of like, like folks, most of us were like in each other's shows. So we would just sort of do the showcase code and do the show. Yeah. And we'd do it under union rules, as a showcase code.
What does that mean under union rules?
Under equity, actors equity.
Yeah, but what kind of rules are we talking about?
Oh, like just making sure that like there's a place for you to change your clothes, like, put on makeup, essentially like a green room and like I'll come back in a second. Like if you're being asked to do something that's way above sort of like the standard expectations of an actor that you would be under, that's either under a different agreement or you'd be compensated appropriately for those things, that you don't get paid necessarily at the minimum rates. Like you may get paid in hugs or you may get paid in like, a few dollars. So, it's just sort of like very basic, just treat them like human beings, treat us like human beings kind of thing. And the thing I was going to say to come back to is like, for example, the like, having a space to change our clothes. Like sometimes those were basements, like literally basements, just dank places. There are people now who are literally A-lists on A-lists for production, for studio features, and like names that people would know that like me and them were doing basement theater. Like we're in between during the intermission, we had to go plunge the toilet because it was flooding in the middle of our shows.
This is so important that people hear this because like this is what breaking in looks like, starting from the bottom. People want to start at the top. People always like, how do I
literally the bottom?
Start at the bottom.
Literal bottom.
So for one show, let's say you put up a show, how many nights would you put it up for, or just once?
If I were putting it up, it depends on what the show was, and depends on under what umbrella, because I was producing independently, but I was also producing because I had co-founded a nonprofit with teen girls who wrote and created their own productions, wrote own shows, speak from their authentic voices. And so if I was producing their work, we would usually have maybe a 2 to 4 night performance. Right. If I was producing sort of other work, the showcase code allows for up to 16 performances.
Okay.
And so sometimes they'd be one-offs, and other times, they would have like a little bit of longer run. And if they were outside of the showcase code, if they were like the next tier up, then, we'd run for maybe 4 weeks.
4 weeks. And then there must have been times where you put up a show where, okay, you got a full house, and then you only have a couple people sitting in the theater. Did that happen?
Absolutely. Very often as an actor, whether it was something I was producing or somebody else was producing, and I was an actor in one of those little tiny theaters, and often Friday nights were often rough nights to get people in because I guess like sort of the thought is people are like not ready, like they like want to unwind, they're not ready to be like at a play necessarily, or a small theater play. Saturday nights were often our strongest nights, and there were definitely times where there were more people on the stage than there were in the audience. That's like so without question.
But that's great that you're saying all this. So how does this very humbling beginning, like how did it help you? Because a lot of people would think, I'm not doing this. So how did it actually help you?
I am incredibly grateful for that time, and use so many of those skills now that I didn't even realize I was developing at that point. First of all, being able to work outside of a corporate structure to let people know what the ideas, what the message is, what the story is something that I use all the time. Having to engage people, just even as simple as like getting a shop owner to hang a poster in their storefront, right, requires a sales pitch, a way to engage them that is a skill that I use now. Multi-hyphenate, which, I really proudly embrace, is something that I learned and built then, and like, still capitalize on those things now. As an actor, being able to pivot in the moment and then taking that kind of skill into a writer's room, like hearing things, being able to see what's the direction that everybody's, helping to move that train forward. Those were all things that like the at least the groundwork for that was so laid during that time period.
Right. So none of this is wasted experience. All of it was good.
None of it. One of my favorite mentors, she says, none of it is wasted. It's all story. And so, yes, it is like if nothing else, it's story for sure.
Right. And then you said you had people you work with, other people in your circle, and you're at the bottom of the basement in your circle who went on to much better things. Right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. People who are series regulars now, folks who are in, movies that we're going to see in the movie theaters, in the Marvels and the DCs and yeah, absolutely. No question.
See, it's so interesting because people say to me, on social media, they reach out and they think maybe, whose ass can I kiss? How do I get my script in Steven Spielberg's, mailbox or whatever? And I'm like, that's not how you do it. You make a circle of friends, you make a community at your level, and then you grow, and then you work your way up. Everyone climbs up together. It's like
absolutely.
So interesting. So especially for theater. Now, so at this point you're writing, you're acting, and this is all in New York. And then what brought you to LA? What was that like, that jump? And why?
I kept saying.
And how many years were you doing this, by the way, in New York?
I will not give years because that will reveal age.
For how many months?
Many more years than, frankly, anyone wants to admit.
Okay, but it was a lot.
And also, was working in obviously bigger productions in New York, right? Sort of major off-Broadway houses, was working regionally a ton, working internationally as well. And then, also was working in television. My first job on TV, I got a co-star on Law and Order: Criminal Intent.
Right.
I was a reporter. Yes, it was freezing cold, but couldn't have been happier. And so, I was working in studio features and daytime soap and primetime episodic, like the whole gambit. In terms of LA, I kept saying something's going to have to bring me to LA. Like it's no secret. I'm not the biggest fan of Los Angeles. And so I just kept sort of pushing it off, saying that something was going to have to bring me to LA. And then I sort of had one of these moments where like it was cacophonic. Everybody was like, you need to go to LA. Like just randomly on the street, I would see like things and people just telling me you have to go to LA. And I had been fighting it for so long, but finally was like, this is a little too much to not pay attention to. And so I started by doing the bi-coastal early in New York, but like being in LA a good amount, and then sort of realized I needed to be in LA more because I realized I wanted to be creating for television, and especially in comedy, which there's not that many opportunities to do that in New York. So I moved my base to LA in June of 2018. So I've been here, what's that, going on 5 years now.
But you didn't, but you were starting over when you moved to LA. You had no network, right?
Not the total opposite. I came to like a huge net because I'd been working in theater and television and film for so long. I knew a ton of people here. I'd come to LA a good amount, so I'd built, a community here. And especially coming from the theater, so many playwrights that I know are in TV rooms, like so many. Yeah. So I came here, like literally walked into a community in a way that I think most people sort of say, oh my gosh, that's not how, LA works. But I was very fortunate to walk right into a very supportive society, if you will. But
then what was that like then? Because you didn't walk into the LA theater scene. Like what were you trying to do? What were those first months like then?
So, oh my goodness, what were those first months? First of all, I landed on my buddy's couch. Well, not couch. She had a whole second bedroom for me. So I had a very lush room situation. I found a place of my own within 2 weeks.
Right.
I started to, when I look back on it, I realized this is what I was doing. I was sort of rebranding myself as a writer first.
Right.
So I showed up in every single solitary writer space that I could find, everything. If like I would be at every writers groups. At one point I was in like 7 writers groups, like every day of the week I was essentially in someone in a writers group.
Who are these? Like, where are these writers groups? Like who are these people and how do you, where are they?
So I found most of them through like socials, like either through like, there's a group called LA TV Writers. I'm sure folks are familiar with. So find some there. There would be others that somebody recommended to me. Mm-hmm. Sort of like if you fall in, you sort of keep falling into more was sort of my experience.
People are probably because you're meeting other people. Now you're building.
Exactly.
And how often do they meet? And like what were they like, these groups?
It depends. It was a range. I'm still in a couple now. It ranged. Some were weekly. For sure. Those are usually the most frequent ones, were the weeklies. Some were bi-weekly, others were monthly. There was one group that I was in for a little bit that was quarterly, and I was like, this makes no sense at all. Like, 3 months goes, oh, that's crazy. Some were bi-monthly for sure. It just really ranged. It depended on the writers, the people who were running it. These were mostly like Zoom even then, like they were not, no, that's not true. Most of them were in person, and then all of them sort of quickly transitioned to Zoom once the world went.
You pay to be in these groups? I mean, someone's got to.
It depends on the group. So in the groups where they rent theaters, you chip in, right, to help cover the cost of the theater or the space, whatever the space was. If it was like a rental situation, some of them would meet in people's homes, like everybody gather around the dining room table or the living room or what have you. Others, there was one guy who had like a creative space that was part of his business. So, he would just sort of open the doors that way. And then obviously like online, it would be just whether somebody has like a Zoom account or what have you.
Is
It
there a
would either be
leader?
free or, just a couple bucks.
Is there a leader or a teacher or someone, or is everybody equal?
Usually a leader, just who coordinates it, not necessarily somebody who's the ones that work best, in my opinion, are where somebody's just sort of helping to handle the admin, but
Yeah.
everyone has sort of an equal voice in terms of notes and bringing in content.
See, you're saying everything perfectly because you really are. Because this is I yell at people all the time. People are like, do I have to move to LA? You don't have to do a damn thing. You don't have to do a damn thing. But this is where the people are who want what you want. And you surround yourself with other people who want, and then you all help each other. And, this is where the people come. And so I
get that question all the time, Michael, like of people saying like, do I have to move to LA? As somebody who literally fought moving to LA, if I say it's helpful and very, very helpful, then I really mean that. Like it's just as you pointed out, like this is where the mecca is in a certain way. And so even if somebody gets into a room and they're outside of LA, maybe New York, okay, that's one thing, but how do you stay in the room? How do you stay in conversation? How do you have those chance meetings with people? How do you get information on a ground level that's not going to be in a televised panel conversation? How do you have that one-on-one connection with the person next to you to be able to get that referral, to be able to make that referral? And I think that's impossible to do on any kind of substantive level outside of New York if somebody's interested in working in television.
Right. Well, not even in New York, because you couldn't even do it in New York, right? I mean,
especially as a comedy writer, I think some drama writers are able to sort of make it kind of happen in New York, but the opportunities are more limited. There's no question about it. Right. Even shows that shoot in New York, a lot of them still write in LA.
They write here, right? And then because it's so funny you say because you were so reluctant, but it sounds like the minute you got here, like you were shot out of a cannon. Like you just did you put yourself out there. No opportunity was too small. I mean, really.
Correct. Or too big. I would show up at things and like, I might not get in, but I'm going to go. I'm showing up anyway. Yeah.
Like, what do you mean by like, what kind of opportunities were those?
Just like events or conversations or panels or, whatever the thing is, like, just as long as I figured out that there were going to be people there who were writers who were going to talk about writing in some way, I was going to show up.
So you went to, I'm guessing, a bunch of Writers Guild events too, right? Panels?
Yes, I did. Mm-hmm. Writers Guild Foundation, especially. Yeah.
And those are open to the public. And, I don't know what they cost, $10, $15. They're not terribly expensive, right?
Sometimes free.
Sometimes free. Yeah.
Yeah.
And why are we not you taking advantage of this? Right. And so then okay, so you're doing all this, you're writing, you got a writing group, you're not putting on any shows for yourself here, right?
No.
Right. You're kind of done with the theater, but then how did you
semi-retired as a theater actor? Let's say it that way. Well, I still write for theater.
And do you put up your shows?
No, I send them, I put them to other people for them to produce. I have retired from the self-producing theater.
But are they being produced in LA or back in New York?
We haven't got anybody on board yet, but when we do, it'll be on the East Coast.
Interesting. But then, okay, so then how did you, at this point, I should point out, you don't have an agent, you don't have a manager, right?
Not in writing. Right. Not literary.
For acting, you had
correct.
Right. They're not helping you with writing. So then what was your first break then for writing?
So I had kind of quasi applied to the fellowships. I thought I was going to get into my first room because one of my playwright buddies was going to like give my script to their showrunner, and their showrunner was going to fall in love with me through the page and hire me. That's how I thought that I was going to end up in a room. And a couple of opportunities like that presented themselves. I didn't meet on any of those shows, but like that's how I thought, like that's where the momentum was. So I thought that's where it's going to happen. Right. In 2019. So remember, I got here in June 2018. In 2019, I was like, I am going to apply to all of the fellowships. Prior to that, I had applied to some in stops and starts. I hadn't really been strategic about it. I hadn't really prepared. Like I just sort of was like, oh, this seems interesting. But 2019, I sort of was like, it's by a little Spike Lee, By Any Means Necessary. So I was doing everything. Like, I was.
What are the fellowships? I don't mean to interrupt, but what fellowships are you talking? Like which ones? I don't even know the names of them.
Yeah, I'm gonna circle into that. So I was blanketing everything. Like I was just like, I'm gonna try everything I can to try to just get something moving now that I'm here and I've got myself acclimated and I've been in these spaces and what have you. So one of those strategies was to apply to all of the fellowships. And so the fellowships are essentially run by studios, networks, and sometimes organizations that are creating opportunities for writers to help them sort of just, get sort of carved in into the world, into this industry. And so I applied to everyone that I could find, even some that were like, you're not exactly the right person for this, but I still applied, just like I showed up to every writer's event. If nothing else, they forced me to write on deadline. So even if I wasn't going to get in and knew that I wasn't going to get in, like at least I had a hard deadline to get my writing done. And so
spec scripts or original movie, like what were your submissions?
Depends on the fellowship. Most of them now require at least one original pilot. Some also look for specs. So I had I had two specs, one that I had written previous, like in an earlier year. And so I like retooled it and to use it. So I had two specs that I was using. And then I had two original pilots. So something I should mention that I didn't mention. So when I realized I was going to move from New York to LA, when I was like, I'm going to go write for TV, I'm going to leave, I'm going to LA, all these things. I had never written a pilot before.
Right.
When I said that I was going to now pick up my like very comfortable existence in New York and move to had to write for television, had never written a pilot, had written everything else, never a pilot. And so I was like, I do not want to be one of those jerks who's in LA talking about like, I want to be a writer. I'm going to be a TV writer, and had never written a pilot. Mm-hmm. So I wrote two pilots in 2 weeks. And like, obviously first drafts that got revised, but like that was because I was like, I do not want to be that person. And those two pilots, well, one of those pilots has served me extraordinarily well. And it's one of my still go-to pilots to this day.
Wow.
So I had, say again?
It was a comedy.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh yeah. Only comedies. Yeah. Only comedies. So one of those pilots is what I was using as my original. And then I had the two specs.
Hey, it's Michael Jamin. If you like my videos and you want me to email them to you for free, join my watch list. Every Friday, I send out my top 3 videos. These are for writers, actors, creative types. You can unsubscribe whenever you want. I'm not going to spam you, and it's absolutely free. Just go to michaeljamin.com/watchlist.
You are such a go-getter because there's so many. First of all, there's so many people. I want to be a writer. I want to. Okay, well, have you written anything? Nah. Have you finished anything? Nah. Like, you got to finish something. You got to finish it, and you got to put it out there.
Yeah.
And then, okay, so then
that's so true.
So what, you accepted to one or many of these fellowships, or what?
I don't ever win things, Jim. And I'm the person who like works hard and gets the thing. And so I didn't really think the fellowship, like I said, I didn't really think the fellowships were going to work out. And I, in my sparse applying before, I had never gotten into any of them. And so I didn't think that was going to be different. I thought I was going to have to apply. I don't know. You hear stories, people applying for 6-7 years and like not getting it, what have you. I got into one single solitary fellowship, one.
Right.
And that was CBS.
Right. And
now called Paramount Global.
Oh, they changed the name of the fellowship? Is that right? Or no?
Mm-hmm.
Really? How many people were in it? Is there like a class?
So there's a cohort, a class essentially. By their reporting, 1,600 applications. They accepted 6 of us.
Wow.
And I was the only comedy writer in my cohort.
And how often did you meet?
So the way the CBS program works is it starts sort of roughly September, October, and you're assigned a mentor who's somebody sort of in the studio or network, and the mentor or 2 mentors sort of help you, guide you, give you notes to writing a new pilot, so you have a fresh script coming out of the program. And then starting in January, that goes till probably like mid-ish to late April. You have at least weekly meetings that have different focus, each time. So one night might be like alumni night, where other alums come and in writers' rooms and answer questions from a very like hands-on practical perspective. Another session will be to meet with managers, another with agents, other times with execs at the studio. There's like different, sort of like each day is like a different adventure kind of thing.
So
Go ahead.
This is with your cohort. So you got, at this point, you got to know your cohort, the other 5 or 6 people in the.
Absolutely. So me and the other 5 people, yes, the other 5 drama writers, absolutely. And I sort of was like, we're going to meet outside of here too. Cause you want to I really wanted us to like, have our own thing, even going into the sessions for sure.
See, this is interesting because that's another misconception that people think. They think, well, it's very competitive. How do I compete against these people? But that wasn't your attitude. Their attitude is, this is my community. I'm not competing against you. We're all in this together. Even if someone succeeds faster than you do, it's still your people.
Absolutely. And, I look at the time, especially as, an actor in the sort of, especially in the theater space. Mm-hmm. And there's like a sort of an expectation. If somebody calls me and is like, hey, I have this job for you. Can you do it? And it's like, I can't do it for whatever reason. It's not schedule or pay or whatever, like, you're not able to do it. My first response is, can I make recommendations to you? Like that was sort of what we did. And so there was not ever an idea of like the other actors who are like me-ish, because nobody's exactly like me, obviously, but like who we may be in the same sort of category on a call sheet.
Honestly, you're like an inspirational speaker, because you really are, because there's not an excuse. You don't have any excuses. You're just a go-getter. You're just like, you make opportunities for yourself.
That's really kind of you to say. I feel like I am like a overworker bee is what I feel like most of the time. But I like get super excited when I like look back and say like, look at what I've been able to do just even in the last few years, so I do get excited about that. But I'm always thinking about like, what's the next thing I need to accomplish? What do I need to do next? That's right. That immigrant parent thing.
I was going to say, because, immigrants, like, they're not comfortable. That's why they leave, because they want more. And it's like, they're not like lazy. They're leaving their home. Like, what are you talking about? They're leaving the home for. Like, that's the opposite of lazy.
Exactly. Exactly.
Okay. So then how did Mom come about?
So coming out of the program, it can be sometimes a little complicated to staff comedy out of the program, sometimes, not all the time. And so I had said coming into the program that Mom was like one of my favorite shows. And so, that's where I was hoping I would, if there was an opportunity to staff there. And it wasn't entirely clear if that was going to be a possibility. One of the execs who I had met during the time, I had told her about how much I love Mom, like literally had watched every episode up to that point, had gone to a taping even before I was in the program, because I just love the show. Like genuinely love the show. At that point, I think there were 132 episodes, had seen all of them at least once, like just was super a fan of the show. And so that exec remembered that. And so when they were looking for a staff writer, she mentioned like, hey, would you be interested in taking a look at, Chandra's scripts? And they did, and really responded to it and brought me in. And it was the shortest meeting in history. And I was like, okay, well, I blew that, but I'm so proud that I like showed up and did my thing. And then, found out a few days later that they were offering me a spot in the room.
Was that with Chuck Lorre, that meeting?
No, that meeting was with the EPs, who are like the hands-on EPs on the show. So the two showrunners and then a third EP.
Wait, was Chuck did he not run Mom, or is it just under his umbrella?
It's under his umbrella at this point. He was more hands-on earlier.
So who was the showrunner then of Mom?
So there were two showrunners at that point. So Gemma Baker, who is one of the creators of the show, and then Nick Mackay was the other.
What was that like for you? Because you're jumping in, not only like the new girl, but like brand new to like anytime you have a new writer, it's difficult because everyone else is established and you're the new face. But also, this is your first staff job. So what was that like for you?
It was incredible and intense at the same time. It's like I said, was one of the things that was most helpful is that I genuinely love the show. And so I came in with like that passion, knew the characters, knew what characters had, character types that had been on the show before. Like I came in with like an institutional knowledge, obviously didn't know the behind the scenes, right? But institutional knowledge about the show itself, and the stories that it told. So that was really, really helpful throughout. And I sort of became, at that point I joined in season 8. And so by that point, folks, had forgotten what they did in season 2 because it was 6 years ago. Right. And I actually had created a spreadsheet of all the episodes with all of the guest actors, who are the series regulars who were in it, what's the story synopsis for the episode, title of the episode, so like I sort of not only was keeping a lot of that knowledge in my head, but also had like a searchable document that I could go back to and say, like, if somebody pitched a story, like, oh, that kind of sounds like something that happened maybe in season 3, or, that kind of thing. I was able to sort of like help, support that piece. Found ways to be helpful in that respect. But to your point, like it's a very intense experience when, like you point out, not only the new girl in this room, a new girl to TV writing, and everyone in that room, with the exception of the other staff writer and a mid-level writer who also joined around the time that I was joining the room, everyone else were upper level writers. Most of them had been with the show since, if not season 3, season 1. Right. And even the staff writer who was staffed when I was staffed had been with the show in a support staff capacity for 2 or 3 seasons. So I was like the new girl in like a lot of ways.
At this point, did you have an agent?
At this point I did. So I did have an agent by this point. I did. And not an agent. I had a manager. At this point in Lit.
And then how did you get? And then after that, did you have any time off between that and Tacoma FD? Was there like how much time lapsed between that?
So we're missing we had a little gap in there. So when I wrapped on Mom, I actually jumped on the show that Christy and you talked about, the Amazon animated show.
What show was that? Right. What was that?
So it was called The Flats. It was an adult animated comedy at Amazon. So that's what I jumped on to shortly after I wrapped on Mom.
And how many episodes was that? I forgot. I totally forgot about that.
We wrote 8 episodes.
Right. Right. And did it even air? Sometimes they do that, right? Didn't even air. Sometimes that happens, man. You get
didn't even air. But we wrote a great show.
Yeah. And then, so then came Tacoma FD.
Yes. Then shortly after I wrapped on that, then I was on Tacoma.
Because you went from multi-camera to animation to single camera.
That's correct.
Right. And what was that transition like for you? You can't even get your feet wet yet. I mean, you're barely getting your feet wet and already you're learning a different format.
I loved it. I mean, I love multicam. I love animation and I love single cam. I've loved what you can do in each of those formats. Is a little bit different in each, right? Obviously at the end of the day, there needs to be story, character, and jokes, but you can sort of, there's just different things you can do in the animated show In 3 lines, I wrote about a bear doing like a dance through the back of a car window. Like that would require, $2 million on a live action show, but like you can do that in animation. So it has its own, sort of perks there. And multi, obviously, like, having the limited number of sets and setups, like just there's just a specialness that can happen there. And obviously the kinetic energy of a live audience. And then a single cam, like, there's just certain storytelling you can do there and certain things you can do there. So I love all of it, to be quite honest. I came in thinking I was going to be just like super and almost exclusively into single cam, but I've loved I really have loved all of them.
And then I know after that, you started getting more into development. So what has that ride been like?
So actually, I got my first development deal when I was on the Amazon show. So that's when I got my first deal. I was actually on deal when I was on Tacoma. So that is super. It's such an interesting development. Is extremely interesting and extremely frustrating at the same time.
We used to call it development hell. I'm not sure if people call it that anymore because they're just grateful for the money.
There's so many moving parts, and I think the part that's most frustrating about development is you can create an amazing show, incredible show, everybody loves it, and it can still not get sold, or get sold to network, or get or air, or get a pilot put, there's so many steps before a show will even vaguely make it to a television screen, and the show could be incredible and still incredible. Everybody loves it and still not make it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. What my partner Steve and I, the victory for us is the minute the check hits our hands. Oh, good. Okay, we got the check. But after that, there's so many other things, and even before then, there's so many things about why a pitch won't even sell. It could be a great pitch. People could love it.
Absolutely.
And they say, we're out of money. We don't want it. There's somebody else is doing something vaguely similar, or something failed that was vaguely similar. We won't do it. It's like,
or your studio execs get laid off.
that happens easily. Yeah, right. So the minute, if you have an exec that's shepherding the project and then they get fired or for whatever reason leave,
or they leave, or they
could leave for promotion. Your project's dead because no one else is gonna want to take it up, and no one else. That's like picking up someone's scraps off the floor. Even if it's a great idea, it's someone else's scraps, and that doesn't count. A victory doesn't count towards you. You don't get the victory. There
are so many places even if it's incredible, there's so many places where it falls apart. So that's definitely the frustrating part, but there's something invigorating about like imagining what a show could be. Like, I think there's something really exciting about that. Especially, I'm really interested in stories that we haven't seen or heard a ton, so like getting to, even if we're just going to get to pitch it, but at least like being able to craft and shape stories that I think are interesting and funny, obviously have heart. It's like, at least I got the opportunity to like put some shape around something that could be incredible.
Are you?
And
go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you're good. And what I was further going to say is what I've seen now from other creatives is a show, like I look at, for example, Lena Waithe. She has a show called 20s that has been, I think it's run for maybe 2 or 3 seasons at this point. She originally wrote that. That was like one of the first pilots she wrote. She wrote it a long time ago, sort of, the earlier days of her career. And the show, she couldn't get anybody to buy it. And then she was able to sell it once sort of people were excited to just, work with her. And so I think there's something also to be said about, okay, cool. Something doesn't sell now, I'll put it in the file drawer, as my mom likes to say, put it in your purse. And then, it might be something you can pull out at some other point. So I always keep that in mind too, of that, a project may not be, some projects are dead for sure, but a project may just be taking a nap, we'll say.
The thing is, the hustle never ends. It
never ends.
Right.
That's why I'm so not into the phrase break in, because I think sometimes people think like once you break in, right, it's like glass, you break in, the glass no longer exists. You're in the space, it's over. but like, it's not that. You have to carve, is how I say. You have to carve in, like there's constantly more material in front of you that you have to sort of, make your way through.
Right, right. It's you're exactly right. Now, is your entire focus now on like commercial projects? Are you doing anything on the side that's just interesting for you?
I mean, I'm still writing for theater, as I mentioned. And so that does not feel commercial at all. That feels, and several of my plays have won awards recently. And so there definitely is, there's that sort of creative space. Most of what I write now, particularly for TV and for film, is not necessarily that I'm going to sell it tomorrow, but I'm like banking it so that I have something, I have it for when I may be looking to sell something like this. Or so now, unless it's theater, I'm thinking in some way commercially, but let me explain what I mean by commercially. It's not to say that I'm going to write something that I think people want me to write or I think is going to sell. I'm writing what I think is interesting and funny and compelling, and then see if there's a market for that thing that I think is interesting, funny, and compelling.
Right. See, that's another thing. People often say to me, like on social media, they'll say, is dark comedy selling now? What's selling now? It's like, don't ask me. What do you want to write? What do you want to write?
It's always going to be hard to sell stuff.
Yeah, right.
Period. So, even if the folks aren't ready for it now, they may be ready for it in 6 months, 8 months, a year, 2 years. But, I like to have the thing in my purse.
But I'm surprised you're not doing more for yourself to star and act in,
Oh yeah, no, I definitely keep that in mind, Jamin. Don't worry.
I am worried about that. I want to make sure you're on camera because who else can play you better than you? And who else can write you better than you,
There's no question about that. That is always on my mind. Let me put it that way. I don't ever want to put myself in a situation where people think I'm going to hold up a project because of my actor side. So that's that. I don't, I don't lead from that place. But it's always somewhere in the folds of my mind.
And do you feel, and then I'll wrap it up with this, but do you feel your writing has now informed your acting? Do you feel like, or vice versa, you've become a better actor because of your writing and better writer because you've been, your acting?
I think, interestingly enough, so I've been doing a little bit more performance, acting in here recently because I have a little bit more flexibility in my schedule, including guest starred on the season premiere of Tacoma, which I had a blast doing.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I know that me as an actor, it comes from a very physical space, and being a writer, at least for me, is not a physical experience. And so I find I have to sort of get myself back on the actor horse in a way that I did not necessarily anticipate or expect. So it feels like I have to warm up a little bit more to feel like I'm performing at the level that I'm accustomed to be performing at. But the other way around, the actor informing the writer, always. And I'm so grateful. A buddy of mine who was just a showrunner on a show, she started as an actor as well, and now is primarily a writer. And she often says one of the best things she ever did for her writing career was start as an actor, was start as a performer. And that always informs my writing. Hearing voice is something that is so clear to me coming from an acting background. Understanding sort of like character moves, character motivations, being able to encapsulate, action in addition to dialogue, all of that is an actor informing writer for sure.
Wow. I honestly, I think you're like, I don't know, am I going to be you've been a fascinating interview. You've been a fascinating guest here because I feel like you're incredibly inspiring. You're so driven. Like no one's going to stop you. No, who's going to stop you from doing whatever the hell you want? I don't think anybody's going to be able to stop you. Yeah.
I appreciate that. The ultimate goal is to, be a writer, actor, creator in a series. Quinta Brunson, like a Mindy Kaling, like a Tina Fey. And so that's our North Star. And so we're just going to keep marching in that direction.
I wouldn't bet against you. That's what I'll say. I think you're wonderful. Chandra, thank
Thanks,
you so
Jamin.
much. How can people follow you? Do you want to promote anything, any social media or anything you want to tell people about?
Sure. So I am on Twitter and TikTok at Chandra7Thomas. And I'm on Instagram at Chandra Thomas. Chandra, Chandra, Thomas with an H.
Thank you so much. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. What a fun time.
No, you're a wonderful guest. You're wonderful. All right, I'm gonna sign off. I'll say goodbye to my podcast listeners. Thank you all so much for listening. Until next time, we got more great guests coming your way. And keep following me at Michael Jamin Writer.
This has been an episode of Screenwriters Need to Hear This with Michael Jamin. If you'd like to support this podcast, please consider subscribing, leaving a review, and sharing this podcast with someone who needs to hear today's subject. For free daily screenwriting tips, follow Michael on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at Michael Jamin Writer. You can follow me on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at Phil A. Hudson. This episode was produced by Phil Hudson and edited by Dallas Crane. Until next time, keep writing.